Welcome to the Pooch Parenting Podcast, a podcast for parents with dogs. I'm Michelle Stern, a certified professional dog trainer, mom, and former teacher. Living with kids and dogs at the same time can feel like a circus. I know because I lived it too. Join us as we interview a variety of experts and parents to discuss topics that will make parenting with dogs easier, safer, and less chaotic. Also, you can love living with your dog again. I'll always keep it real, which might even mean that you hear the messiness of life in the background on occasion, but at least you know you're not alone. As summer is winding down, some of you may still want to get in one last adventure with your kids and dogs, and you might want to get a travel trailer or RV and hit the road. So today's episode, we're going to talk about what it's like to live on the road with kids and dogs with my friend Mary, including some safety tips and strategies to manage in a small space. Mary is an adventure-loving mama to one human boy and two fur boys living and working on the road full-time. She's a former teacher that yelled more than she likes to admit, and she firmly believed in corporal punishment. Luckily for her son and her family, they were living abroad when she became a mother, and that created a space and time to evaluate what they believed and valued. That journey led her to parenting from connection and curiosity. And as she healed her own generational traumas, she started helping others to do the same. Now she helps parents just like you to break generational traumas and find confidence and connection in their parenting and or homeschooling journeys. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. And by
So,
the way, I've
yes.
taken my dogs to Hong Kong and back. So I
Oh my
have
gosh.
lots of travel in that as well.
You really have. Yeah, it's interesting. I flew with my puppy for the first time when I got her because I got her from somewhere that wasn't near me. And it was really great because having lived that experience, I could then give other people better advice on little tricks of the trade and little things that I didn't know. I started interviewing other colleagues about traveling with their dogs and what we could do to keep the puppy safe because, little puppies are so prone to germs. And I'm sure traveling abroad, you have to get so many vaccinations and have so much proof of responsibility in order to even do that, right?
There's definitely a lot of paperwork that goes into it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, though, the same could not be true for your lifestyle in terms of the levels of responsibility, right? So, talk to us a little bit about what it means to live on the road full time, what that actually looks like for you, and what led you and your family to that lifestyle.
So what led to our lifestyle is I got itchy feet. I cannot stay in one place for very long. I've realized that by year 3, I am done. I'm ready to move on somewhere. So at first, we just moved abroad. We moved to Hong Kong. The reason we chose Hong Kong, good pay. English was one of the legal languages. And then our dogs, this was the big one, our dogs could go there and back without quarantine. So that was actually one of the major decisions for us, as well as my husband could work on my visa and didn't need his own visa. So we did that for a while, and there were great aspects to it, but I'm not a city person,
Me
and I
neither.
just need to see more. There's so much to see out in the world. And so we decided to come back and move into an RV. And our goal was to initially travel fast, but we thought we were going to restore an Airstream. It is still sitting completely unrestored. I'm that is my 10-year goal. When my kid can actually help out, then I will do it. It'll be my retirement project. Um, but yeah, so now we've traveled very slow, we've traveled fast, and now we basically do seasons. So we'll do a summer season somewhere, and then we'll do a winter season, usually in Florida, but we're also going to venture out west. And we do it this way because the community is amazing. But also because your home is with you. So I don't have to worry about, does this hotel room or Airbnb accept my dog?
Mm,
It's just, he's always in my home. And while there
yeah.
are some rules to campgrounds, 99% of them accept dogs. So it's not usually a huge deal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Before the pandemic, or I guess at the beginning of the pandemic, we bought a travel trailer and it was the first time we'd ever done anything like that. We rented one once a few months before that and took a small trip and we thought, yeah, this is so much fun. And then we started looking and then, the pandemic happened. And it's actually kind of interesting because we now live in Central Oregon and the way we got here was because we actually drove our trailer up on an adventure. We stayed, and you and I had talked about this before we started recording. We stayed at a Thousand Trails campground that was beautiful. It was in the woods and it was gorgeous and it was spread out and still felt really peaceful. We weren't on top of each other, which I really liked. And we were literally in the woods. And we liked it so much and found out that we could leave our trailer there for a super affordable rate if we joined as a member. So we literally decided we're going to just leave our trailer here. We were going to have to pay to store it back at home anyway. So I'd rather leave it in the woods and then we would come back and forth just driving the truck without schlepping the trailer attached to it. Much easier. And we called it our cabin. So we would go back to the Bay Area, come stay in our trailer, our cabin, as we called it, in Central Oregon. And I loved it a lot. But our trailer's very small. It's 19 feet tip to toe or whatever. It's little. We do have like a bedroom with a curtain. That's how you separate the bedroom. And then there's there's one part that pushes out to make it bigger where the kitchen table is. And my husband had to work from that kitchen table. And I did too when I saw clients. It was a very tight space. And it's great, but not for super long amounts of time together
Yeah.
because you can't really do much. And when we came in the winter, there's just nowhere to go. If it's freezing out, you're either sitting on your bed, sitting at the kitchen table, or freezing your buns off outside. And so that's when I started looking at houses. And anyway, now we actually live here, which is crazy. But Glenn just went to the trailer yesterday, in fact, to check it out. We're storing it somewhere and he's like ready to go because we have a lot of bad smoke from wildfires. And so
Mhm.
he wants us to, get it in working condition again so that we can just up and get out of here
Yeah.
when the time goes. And it's fun. And I agree with you that when the dogs are comfortable in a place that then it's just much easier because you have that routine and that level of comfort. But you and I both had a shared experience in which there were dogs that chased us in these campgrounds. Can you talk to me? You had a pretty tough experience. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
I've had a few tough experiences. um, so let me preface this by saying I grew up with dogs. I grew up with rescue dogs. My parents did dachshund rescue, and so I have seen like most scared, most aggressive dogs. I'm not. I'm typically not afraid of dogs. I was the one that would find the stray and bring it home, right? Like this was me. I'm not someone that's gonna sit there and just be like, oh, every little dog that's like barking at me. However, 2 years ago last week, my son was 4 at the time and was mauled in a campground. We had already met the dog. We had very strict routines on how you approach a dog. You ask for permission, you wait for permission, and even at 4 years old, he was 99% of the time good about doing that. He loved dogs, still does. However, he had already met this dog, and then they're 4. Him and this little girl were playing. The mom and I were talking, and she went to her camper, which wasn't very far away at all. Um, and mom said she could see them from where she was to go get water, which was outside the camper. They weren't supposed to go in. But then, as 4-year-olds do, they get an idea in their head. And she opened the door for my son, I guess to maybe go see the dog or go see a toy, something. And when he went in, the dog mauled him. And when I say mauled, it wasn't a warning snap. It wasn't like a, hey, get out of here. It was, I almost lost my son.
I just got
Luckily,
the
the
shivers.
mom was able to rescue him, and there was a doctor that heard me screaming and was able to, get him covered up. And we were luckily in an area. Um, we were at 1,000 Trails actually, and they were near one of the best hospitals with the best children's plastic surgeons. So he's okay. Um, Most of the time, you wouldn't even know now. But
Right.
yeah, we had to go through that, and we had to experience like really work through our feelings and our fears while living in campgrounds with a bunch of other dogs.
That's
And
terrifying.
yeah, yeah, we don't go to
Because
dog
yeah.
parks anymore. We don't.
Yeah. Well, it's hard because even though some of these campgrounds have decent size spots where you
Mhm.
live on this spot, where there's a bit of a buffer of space around your trailer or your camper, um, they're neighbors. It's just like living on a street where there are
Yes.
neighbors, where there's house and a little bit of grass or plants and then another house, right? So it's similar to that. But some people are less responsible, obviously. There are other people. I know that at our campground where we were, there were people that would sometimes put out like a line with a stake in the ground or whatever, and the dog would be able to be outside on a tether and have however long the tether was of a distance
Hmm.
where it could just walk around, which, is fine. When you don't have fencing, that's a great way to do it. But the problem is if you have a child, or if for some reason the dog somehow pulls the stake out of the ground or whatever, that you're
Hmm.
kind of relying on good judgment either on the dog or you or your kid to not get too close because the
Yeah.
dog is just out there. And usually the people are inside their trailer, so it's not like
Yep.
they're sitting in a
They're not
chair.
supposed to be typically, but yes, they are.
Right, right, exactly. So there's a variety of ways that people can do it, but there was a time I got scared because I had my little border terrier Pippin was with us. I didn't have my puppy at the time, and we would walk around the campground. They had many acres of trails and stuff. It was great. But there was this one guy kind of on a corner spot, and he pretty much lived there. I mean, you're not supposed to live there
Yeah.
full time with Thousand Trails. You have to, I think it's like you're allowed to live there for 9 months or something. So people would come and go and track their days. But anyway, this guy very much lived there. And he had a shepherd that was very protective of his zone where his area was. But he was on a corner spot. And so in order to walk to the laundry room or to get around, if I wanted to do a loop of a walk, I had to pass his site, and his dog would come out guns a blazing. I mean, just really raw, and it was alarming, and it was on a cable or something. And then the guy would come out and yell at him, and I mean, it was obviously not a very productive situation because the same routine happened over and over again. And I got to the point where I would like look around the corner and see if I could see the dog, and if the dog wasn't there, sometimes then I would choose to walk that way. I didn't want to frustrate the guy's dog by
Yeah.
walking so close. I mean, it's not nice of me either to, I
Yeah.
feel like I was tormenting the dog, but yet I had to get from point A to point B sometimes. So sometimes I would change my routine. So it's just hard. It's hard to know how the other dog is feeling, if it's frustrated because it's not getting to do the things it needs to do. In the
Yeah.
case where your son was hurt, God only knows what was going on, if that dog had a history of those kinds of things. It's not
Yeah.
uncommon for a dog to feel protective of its space. It's less common for a dog to feel that way about a child coming into that
Yeah.
space because
Especially
kids are
because the
generally.
owner's child was with him, right? Like, he
Yeah.
wasn't, like, breaking and entering and, like, any of those
Yeah.
things. They
Right.
were all together. They were together, and it
It's
still
so
happened.
sad and
It was a
scary.
freak accident. I don't blame the family one iota.
Right.
Uh, there's some things I'm not allowed to say, but the
Yeah.
mom I will be eternally grateful for. To
Yeah.
this day, I still don't even know what she did with her baby. She had a 4-month-old baby. And when I saw her, she was holding the dog, and the kids, the two 4-year-olds, were behind her.
Yeah.
And so I still don't. I,
So she
but I
really threw
will.
herself in there to save your kid,
Yes,
which is
she did,
amazing.
and
Yeah.
I will forever and a day just wish
Yeah.
all the blessing on her. you
Right.
know,
Absolutely.
in our
It's
kids.
terrifying though, and it's scary
Yeah.
because she put herself at risk, but she was probably so scared and
Yeah.
sad and devastated and felt so guilty because something
Yeah.
like that happened.
And I had my dogs with me. Like, I had my dogs on their leashes. Um, and I knew there was no way that I could get closer and to like get to my kid
Right.
without either releasing my dogs to go do whatever. And one was, we'd only had him 3 weeks. He was a puppy. And the other one, is older, but like there was no way for me to like save my child without causing more issues,
You
you
would have
know?
had to sacrifice one thing to do another
Yeah.
thing, and luckily she was there,
Yeah.
and it's
Luckily.
good. I mean, I think
So
that's really great.
yeah. And then the campground was great. They took the dogs for me and they took the dogs back for me and whatnot. And they checked in on them while we were at the hospital until my mom got there. Um, but yeah, you just never really know. I mean, we've overcome a lot of our trauma. My son will still love on dogs as long as, but he's very, like, if they start barking at him or coming towards him, he's done. Like,
Mhm.
like he's like, nope, he goes the other way. They have to like hold the dog and make sure that it's okay for him to really approach. But it was a long time coming. I mean, I remember we were at a dog park. It was a small one that barely anybody used at the campground. The puppy was still quite a puppy then, and these two wolfhounds came. We had already met these wolfhounds at another campground. Like, my son had already pet them and everything. They're the sweetest, gentlest, like, don't bark at all, right? But he saw them coming and he had a massive panic attack.
Mhm.
So at that point I was like, okay, we're done. Like,
Yeah.
we're not putting anybody in this situation anymore, because my
Yeah.
puppy also was like constantly rolled by other dogs
Oh,
and
yeah.
like aggressively chased
Mhm.
when he didn't want to be. So we were just like, we're done with dog
Yeah.
parks. Like, we
Yeah.
will figure out a different way.
Right.
But even here at this campground, it's not a Thousand Trails, it's a county campground we are camp hosting at. So I'm like leading activities and things like that, trying to be social. That's our job.
Yeah.
And I was going around and I have a smile on my face. There's a bunch of people sitting outside. There's two dogs sitting outside. Um, and one of them was on a leash, quote unquote. And the guy said that he just escaped his hand, but the amount of reaction time between what happened and when he reacted, I have a feeling the dog was just kind of like sitting at his feet at first.
Mhm.
And here I come with my little schedule, being like, hey. And all of a sudden, this dog is charging me
Oh boy.
aggressively, barking and growling. I jump back, and the dog still got within inches before the owner's wife got him.
Ugh.
Um, and I was just, I was shaking. I was, I just very curtly said, dogs need to be leashed and restrained at all times. Here's your paper. And I walked away. Like, I was just very assertive and like, that you need to be restrained.
Yeah.
And then internally, I was just thinking, because 3 minutes beforehand, my son was the one handing out the papers,
Oh
and he had
gosh.
gotten hot and tired and gave up, as
Yeah.
6-year-olds do. And I was like, if that had been my kid, this would have been a
A
very different
repeat.
situation again,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was just like, thank God he got tired. Like, um, and then the very next day, I was walking my dogs, and I decided not to walk in the campground, but to walk along this very quiet road that's just a few like um, summer cabins. They're all private cabins,
Mhm.
private properties. And this guy was visiting his mom and had a German Shepherd and was not on a leash. And the
Ugh.
German Shepherd started barking aggressively and charging me. And I yelled, no.
Mhm.
I stood there, I looked at him, and I yelled, no. And the dog stopped. And the owner said something, and the dog stopped. But then the owner yelled at me. Like, you just don't know what people are thinking.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know that if you flee, you're possibly in more danger, but you have to process so much information so quickly. And I think your instinct there to yell at the dog no was probably amazing because some dogs will stop in their tracks.
Yeah.
We've my mentor Trish King taught us, and it sounded so funny at the time, but it actually has worked, that when you're out on a hike or out on a walk and a dog comes out of nowhere, she says to yell, "Go home," to the
Yep.
dog. And
I've done that.
sometimes the dog literally turns around and leaves. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that's just crazy to me that,
No, it worked.
but
I had to do it in Kentucky.
yeah.
We were at a full-time family event, so it was just like 13 families that got together, and we were all boondocking on our friend's new property that they were building into a campground. Well, it's in the middle of nowhere. So these are like country dogs, right? They don't do fences, leashes, none of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And I was walking my dogs and I saw a dog probably 200, 300 feet in the distance. So I was just like, yeah, I'm not even. I turned around and I started walking away. Well, I guess they had seen us, and all of a sudden, 6 dogs of varying sizes comes running towards us.
Oof.
And I'm a dog, and I know my dog can be dog aggressive, especially if he feels like he's being, attacked in some way. And so I did. I stood my ground. I yelled at the dogs. I said, "Go home." I just looked at them. I used my finger, and you could hear me, like all the men and that were around and whatnot. They were just like, "Whoa, what's going on?" I was just like, "No, go home." And then they started going home, and I turned around and I kept walking, and then I heard them again, so I turned around and I said, "No, go home." And they did. They eventually went home, but
Oh,
you have to be assertive. You can't be like scared and wishy-washy because they're gonna feel that.
yeah.
So, and not that you're being mean and aggressive, you're just being
Oh, you're not being mean.
hurt.
You're just
No,
telling them what you need them to do. And they're,
I'm,
thank goodness that works because that
yeah.
would be hard.
They said
Yeah.
the owners were like, "Oh, well, they're actually really friendly dogs. They like to go to the construction workers, and the construction workers give them food." I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
"Yeah, I don't care. Like, I'm not having 6 strange
Well, you
dogs
can feel
approach me."
vulnerable in that. Yeah, you feel
Yeah.
vulnerable in that situation. All right, I wanna change gears a little bit and talk about what it's like to live in a tight space like an RV with a child and dogs, because it's not like you've got a mansion there to separate everybody into different zones. And you've been doing this. Your son was little, right? Was he
Yeah.
toddler age when you were doing
It
this?
was 2.5, almost 2.5.
Okay. So how did you manage your space? Like, how much space are we dealing with? Can you
So we have
describe
lived
to
in
us what it looks like in there?
Yeah, so we have lived in 2 different campers. Our first one was 26 foot long. It was a 30-year-old fifth wheel, so it was one of those that, you climb up into the bed area,
Okay.
and
Yep.
that's it. And um, we had Duke. Here's Duke.
Oh, hi, dude.
He's almost 13.
Okay.
And then we had another dog, Bear, who was a couple years older. He has since passed away. Um, and he was bigger. Duke would jump up into the bed, so he would just come and sleep with us. Bear was too big and too old, so we he just found a spot, and there were no slides in that space. It was just a hallway, kind of like your
Mhm.
friend's Airstream, right? Just a
Yeah.
hallway.
Mhm.
And he would always lay in front of the bathroom door. Just always lay in front of the bathroom door. So when
Okay.
you live in a tiny space with dogs, it's just a lot of, "Hey buddy, I need you to like scoot over," like a gentle nudge with your foot kind of thing. As everyone just kind of finds a spot to be. But they
Okay.
always find a spot to be. So right now I again have 2 dogs. You can see they both have found a spot to be.
Yep. Yep. I can. How did you navigate the spaces with a toddler who was likely very interested in the dog, and toddlers don't find a spot to be the way that dogs find a spot to be. So how did you manage that?
Um We have had lots of discussions on really looking at dog behavior, like, oh, look, that, and it too. It was more me having to manage than him, obviously, but we still discuss it because
Hmm.
it builds on itself.
Right.
Now he can tell, like, and he'll be, oh, I'm sorry, Wesley, I'm sorry, Wesley, like he's way better at it now. Um, so I would often have him up in the bed area, so it would just be maybe Duke up there. Um, or it was like on the couch area and the dogs would be on the floor, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But we've always had to have a lot of talks about things that we don't pull ears, we don't pull
Hmm.
tails, all those kinds of things.
Right.
Nowadays, my son might want them out of his room, so either he tries to say Dookie out, Wesley out, but mostly it's me calling for them to come out, that kind of thing. And
Hmm.
then we also, in this space, we have a much bigger space now. We have a 36-foot long fifth wheel, and it's a newer one, so it got slides and it's bigger and whatnot. So we have actually utilized a couple baby gates. We have the
Hmm.
retractable baby gates
Yes.
in a
Hmm.
couple of the spaces. One of them, my lovely old man here has definitely torn off the wall
Oh
in
boy.
his endeavors. He's the one that would escape from our fenced in yard and move cinder blocks with his nose.
Oh
So
goodness.
he's hard to like contain.
Contain. Yeah.
He doesn't do anything. He just wants to be in the space,
Right.
or look out the window, kind of thing. My
Yeah.
son's room has windows; they can see out better. And unfortunately, as the camp host, we are front and center.
Oh,
Like,
right. Yes.
everybody has to go by us. And
Hmm.
so there's a lot for my dogs to want to like see and bark at sometimes.
Oh yeah.
So we've had to kind of block things off. Like, we'll use their container of dog food to like block things off, or
Uh-huh.
that kind of thing.
I had a client who was really scared because she had two small dogs and a toddler, and they lived in an RV. And one of her dogs was actively trying to bite her toddler, and it was super
Mm,
scary. And she
yeah.
worshiped her dogs and loved them so much and was just devastated by this development because not all toddlers are as receptive. I mean, I think that, you said you had a lot of talks with your son and it worked. But I do think that some toddlers push those boundaries a lot as
Oh
they're
yeah. Like I
growing and
said,
developing.
I was
Mhm.
the impulse control at that age.
Totally. Exactly. But I think that for some people, they need to do more than talking, obviously. And so we did have her install one of those retractable gates inside of her rig. She The way that hers was set up is there was one bedroom space that was slightly separate, and so we set up the retractable gate there to separate the living space from her bedroom space, and then either the dog or her child would sort of take turns in that zone because literally it was dangerous, like they could not be together. And so it was just so hard because you're in a small space. It's not like you can go down to the basement or go out, whatever. I mean, the good news is if weather permits and you have a structure, a lot of people with RVs, and I thought this was really sweet and cute actually. This would not work for your escape artist dog, but for some dogs who are less motivated to leave, is a lot of the RVs would have, X pens or
Yep.
portable, you know, panels or whatever, and they
Yeah.
would set up this beautiful thing around their trailer so that they could open the door and the dog could go outside and lay in the sun or in the dirt,
Yep.
as the case in Central Oregon. It's
Oh,
dirt everywhere. It's
dirt,
amazing.
sand, yes, all the
Yeah,
sand.
exactly, all of it. Oh, so dirty. But you put big mats out and you put the
Yep.
panels out and the dog can be outside. But, again, not all seasons are gonna be like that, and not everybody, um, who lives in a trailer can move the trailer, right? Some people literally it's drivable, some people you have to tow it, and it's hard. I don't like towing it. I kind of
my husband is better at it, and it scares me when it's windy, and
Yeah.
it's not my jam. But it can be difficult, right? And so when you're somewhere and it's freezing and there's not a lot of options, it's not like you're going to put your whip it out in the winter. I mean, come on,
No.
you're just not going to do that. They need to be in their
No.
cozy cave bed inside by the heat vent. So anyway, it was really hard for her, and we really just had to work very hard on these zones. And getting everyone comfortable in those zones, which
Yeah.
takes time. It's not an immediate, um, for some dogs, you can stick up a baby gate and all is fine in the world at that moment. They're like, thank God you gave me relief from the annoying toddler. And I am grateful for that. And so I'm going to
Yeah.
be happy on my side. But then you're dealing with the toddler who's maybe trying to climb over it and still get to the dog. But some dogs have separation issues. They have trouble
Yes.
being on the other side of a barrier. They're feeling like they're frustrated because you're away from them.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, the good news about living in a trailer is that even if you're on the other side of the barrier, you're not that far away and they can probably still see you,
Yes.
or at least hear you, which for some dogs is frustrating because they hear you and see you, but they can't be with you. But regardless, I don't want people to hear that idea of like, oh, put up a baby gate and that's all there is to it. That can be the case for some families, but it's not the case for all of
Yeah.
them. And so I just want to give empathy if that's hard for your dog. It can be really hard for puppies too, especially because puppies naturally want to be connected to their litter mates, their mom, you, whoever,
Yeah.
and so that can be a skill that takes time and patience. And, obviously I can help through that if that happens to be the case. But it is a challenge sometimes living in a tiny space, isn't it? Because
It
you have
is.
your husband, you and your son and the 2 dogs.
And we're not
Yeah.
small people. um and you have the other thing you have to one thing that we're still working through. When you get a new dog in the situation like we did. So we actually got a puppy while living in an RV because our old dog had passed and we were just like, okay, maybe it's time. But crate training is not a thing that we could ever even think to put in here for
Yeah.
a dog that size. For a small dog, sure, but not for a dog our size. We have a medium sized Bernedoodle.
Yeah.
There's just no way that we could fit a. I don't even know. We could barely fit our people, right? Like we can't fit a big old cage. And so dealing having that as well as he's a resource guarder.
Oh boy.
And yeah, it's something that we've been working on a lot. It will I don't think it will ever be great, but like we have to have different areas of the camper to feed our dogs.
Yeah.
Um, and then we have to like really work with him on, hey, the bed is not yours. You
Hmm.
can only be on the bed when we say, which
Yeah.
is really hard in a tiny space. Like most people who train dogs don't understand that it's not like I don't have a door to close.
Yeah.
Literally, the only doors I have are the one to go outside and the one to go in the bathroom.
Yep. The toilet. That's it.
That's it.
I feel
Like,
that.
that's all
And
I got.
also, and just to point out too, I mean, this is the obvious and you were getting at this, but I'm going to just say it straight out that when you have a puppy and another dog, you have to have management between the two of them, just like
Yeah.
you would between a toddler and a dog, because
Mhm.
puppies are annoying. And I say this as a person who is a puppy fanatic. I love puppies, but they are annoying. And I'm not going to ignore the fact that a puppy that has full access to another dog is probably going to get hurt at some point because the other dog is going to be like, dude, back off. And they will correct the puppy. And
Yeah.
luckily for me, Pippin is super appropriate when he corrects Olive, my puppy. She's now
Mhm.
8 months old, but she can be a total menace. And he does correct her, but he doesn't do it inappropriately. So she
Yeah.
does listen after a little bit, but some dogs would overcorrect and could hurt her. And so I just sometimes need to use management to keep them apart so that he is protected, because feeling safe is emotional and physical. I mean, you got to that when you talked to me about the scary story with the dog rushing at you. You did not feel physically safe, and you also had past trauma, so you did not feel emotionally safe, right?
Uh-oh.
And the same thing is true with, with our dogs. I want them physically safe. I don't want the puppy to get hurt. And
Yeah.
I don't want my older dog to be a pincushion for puppy teeth, right? But I also want them feeling like mom's got you. I've got you. I'm going to keep you safe. They're annoying and I'm going to give you space because you deserve rest and peace and quiet the way that the rest of us deserve that, right? So when you bring a puppy into a small space, you're then managing a child, an adult dog, and a puppy. And I think that's where those retractable gates are invaluable because you have no spaces. But if you live in a long tube, like my friend in her Airstream, that's like a tube, literally.
It is.
Um, or another kind of a trailer that is just sort of long, because that's tend to be how they are, that you can divide up that hallway with those retractable gates. And some of my clients now, I work with people to get their dogs ready before new babies are born. And we often set up a series of gates, whatever kind you want, but to just have different zones of the house so that you just don't have to think about it when you're sleep
Yeah.
deprived. And hallways are great. We have a lot of families that live in open floor plan houses, which is the opposite of a trailer. And there are no hallways
There's
or
no way to segment.
doorways.
Yeah.
So in those cases, then we use pens, or we
Yep.
literally open up a huge pen and divide a room in half or whatever. There's a million different ways. And so when people sometimes come to me with an objection and say, oh, well, I can't divide my space because X, Y, and Z, I'm like, oh no, I've got you. I've got solutions for all these types of spaces. We've got RVs covered. We've got open floor plans covered. We've
Yeah.
got, hallways covered. Just because, thank goodness, manufacturers of these products are insightful, or they've heard from enough potential clients of like, this is what we need. And
Yeah.
there's tons of options, and regardless of your spatial constraints. And so you're really living in that right now. And then to add to that, I want to reiterate something that you said. The camp host, for those of you that aren't familiar with this, the camp host is a person who lives generally in an RV at the front of the campground, or when people come in, you greet them, you make them feel welcome. You're also responsible for sort of keeping the peace and making sure that people don't leave too much trash out, and you want it to look nice, and you often have to clean the bathrooms, and it's a thankless job for the people who have to do that, by the way. So thank you. I appreciate that. Because that's where we shower usually, because we don't want to fill up our whole water tank with shower
Yeah.
water. But anyway, you're in a spot where there's high visibility, which means that if you have a dog that is easily overstimulated by passing dogs, passing children, bicycles,
Mhm.
cars, dust, whatever. Whew, man, that's a lot. And then you have to think about, okay, well, do I need to block off the windows? Do I put window cling film up so my dog it lets light in, but they can't see out because my poor dog is so stressed with all this
Yep.
input, right? The sensory input. So you're kind of in a vulnerable spot, really.
Yeah. And we've had to do we haven't I renovated my son's room this summer, and so I was finally able to put a curtain up over the one window, but they still like sometimes move it, but it has helped.
I would say that there are probably some dogs that are not equipped for that type of lifestyle too.
Yeah.
That it's hard because we may want that lifestyle, be on the road, go around, and some dogs may just be too sensitive for it, or maybe too scared, or too fearful or whatever. We had an incident with Pippin one time. We were in Washington, and it was really interesting. Pippin has some separation anxiety. So being in a trailer is great because he's with us all the time. But what can happen with dogs that have sound sensitive, or that have separation anxiety, is that they can also have sound sensitivity. The two of those things often go hand in hand. And there were some tree trimmers in the place where we were. And for some reason, that really freaked him out. And he had this full blown panic attack, and he tucked his tail and wanted to run and bolt. And there was
Mhm.
nowhere I could really go to escape from that kind of input. And
Yeah.
so my husband had to drive the truck over and pick us up so I could get him into the truck. And then I we had to go out of the campground for a while so that he could decompress because
Oh,
it wasn't it wasn't working out for him. And
yeah.
then we were gone for a while and he could shake it off. And, um, I'm working with a veterinary behaviorist on this and we're trying to see what we can do to help him be more comfortable.
Yeah.
Luckily, by the time we got back, that sensory input was gone and he luckily didn't have a negative association with the space. And so he was able to happily come back in the trailer and walk around and be okay. But it was so sad for me to see him have such a reaction. And it made me think like, if he were going to react like that every time we went somewhere, then I don't think I could continue to do that, or I would continue to do it and have to leave him somewhere else
Yeah.
or have
I've
somebody
had
babysit
friends that
him.
have had to make that really hard decision themselves. And it's not an easy one. I mean, we've also, with Wesley, he's 2 now, but we've, we have to weigh that conversation sometimes too. Like, is this okay for him? Is it not? Um, it seems to come and go, so it's really hard to make that kind of decision. But it's not one that people make lightly.
Right.
Um, and sometimes it is for the best dog, for the dog to be rehomed in those situations. Um, Luckily, for the most part, Wesley's okay, especially with that. And we also have been working with a behaviorist, or have worked with a behaviorist, and so there are things that we're doing to help manage that and help him with that reactivity.
Hmm.
Um, and he's definitely better than he was,
Right.
but you don't know. We leave our luckily, unluckily, the AC units in RVs are extraordinarily loud.
Yes.
And so we always leave the fan running. So we always have it on whenever we leave the house,
Yeah.
so that it's like a white noise that kind of,
Hmm.
um, it doesn't completely diminish. I mean, dogs have great sense of hearing and whatnot,
Right.
but it does help kind of mitigate it. And then sometimes we'll even leave the TV on.
Yeah.
I also have found that they do well together.
Hmm.
I don't know, because we did have a period of time where our one dog was by himself. And he definitely did better once we had another dog with him, even if he was annoyed by him sometimes. Like,
Yeah.
they do, they, it's almost like they calm each other down, for sure.
That's good for your dogs. It's funny because my Pippin, who has separation issues, if he starts howling, he will sometimes trigger the puppy to start howling.
Oh,
And if
yes.
she's by herself, she never does it. So it's interesting because I think that sometimes they can calm each other and sometimes they can rile each other up, right?
We,
Um,
if
so
they
that
hear
can,
us outside without them,
yeah,
they're barking. And
yeah.
so we've had to do these experiments, because you don't want to be the person in the campground where your dog's barking all day long while you're
Oh, yeah,
gone.
of course not. Yes.
And then so, like, we'll do these experiments where we'll go and then we'll sneak back after a few minutes to see what's going on. And typically after 5 minutes, they're done.
Yeah. Right. That's
It's
good.
very, very rare that they would continue to bark after
Yeah.
that.
That's good.
Especially because in most campgrounds, in this campground, I walk them together because it's typically pretty quiet. But our campground in Florida, I cannot walk them together. They get too reactive. There's too many other dogs, too many other animals.
Hmm.
Um, that it's just safest for me to walk them by themselves. And they don't like that. They
Yeah.
don't like me going with the other dog without them.
Yeah.
And so they will bark for a few minutes. But again, by the time I come back, they're typically not barking.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question, and then we'll wrap up. But the last thing I want to ask you is if you have any advice for other parents, mostly moms listen, but hey dads, if you're out there, um, for parents about how to manage their kids and dogs if you are living or just traveling, summer travel or whatever, if you want to give it a go and rent a camper or caravan or whatever, and you
Yeah.
want to try it out. What advice would you give in terms of etiquette, in terms of children, dogs? Are there any things to look out for? um, what would you set somebody up with for some
So
advice?
I'm sure, I know I've already alluded to it, but just to be frank about it, for one, is to be your child's impulse control. Your child does not have a fully functioning prefrontal cortex. They do not have the impulse control that you do, and they won't until about 25. So that's why your car insurance goes down at 25. So you need to be your child's impulse control. I actually, I didn't know them. They weren't like a friend beforehand, but I helped them through the situation. They're not even traveling. They are stationary, and they had a 9-year-old little boy who was walking a friend home, and quote unquote friend told them to go pet the dog that was in the yard, and the dog mauled it.
Oh,
Not as bad as my son, but really like almost lost an eye. And it's just one of those things where like this is a continuous discussion, and we are continuously being the impulse control. I never tell my son, "Oh, just go pet the dog. He's fine." It's a, I always ask him, "How are you? Do you want to pet the dog? What do you need them to do to feel safe in order to pet that dog?" Because I never want to dismiss his feelings. His feelings are completely valid. Even before the traumatic event, his feelings will be completely valid. I mean, I remember I was 7 and my uncle's dachshund bit both of my knees. And as I was screaming, because, I'm in pain, my father covered my mouth because he thought I was just scared of the German Shepherd in the
oh,
background. He didn't know it was happening. He just assumed I was being a ridiculous kid, scared of a German Shepherd, which I don't know why, because we used to own one.
oh my
And he
gosh.
just covered my mouth until he realized that I had blood literally dripping down my legs and the dog was
Ugh.
hanging from one of my knees. So, like, we can't, and that one's an obvious one, right? But there's not always obvious why our kids might not want to. They just have an internal instinct. We should trust that. We can help them, we can navigate that with them, but never force them.
Mhm.
And by teaching them, like, hey, does this feel safe to you or not? That will go a long way to when they are 9, walking by themselves and can mitigate that. But always, you are their impulse control. You have to make sure that they're not stepping and rolling all over their bodies and whatnot. He's
Mhm.
6, has had this experience, knows our dog's cues, and we still have to have the talks, and I have to help move his body sometimes
Right.
so that he's not accidentally kicking the
Yeah.
dog's face.
No, that's good. And I would just add to what you're saying that the same is true of the dog, that we have to read the dog, translate for our child what the dog is saying with their body. And the dog has to want to say hi too, right? It has to go
Yes,
both ways.
exactly.
This is a great opportunity to talk about consent, right? That this is
Yes.
very much this is all around. The dog has to really want an interaction with you, and you have to
Mhm.
really want an interaction with them, and it has to be consensual on both sides of
Yes.
this, right? And so
Enthusiastically consensual.
yeah, and if a dog is just, like, neutral, then I would just skip it and say, "You know what? They don't want to say hi." And in fact, last night, I brought Pippin with me, to a food truck. I met my kids for dinner, and Pippin was with us, and there were 2 little boys running around wrestling. Their dad was working in one of the food trucks, and they were bored, and one ran over towards Pippin and said, "Dog," and he started to reach over Pippin's head, and I put my
Mhm.
body in between them, and I said, "He doesn't want you to pet him." And he said, "I want
Yep.
to pet him." And I said, "I'm sorry, he doesn't want you to pet him. Please
Yep.
don't do that." And the boy looked at me with surprise because most people just are
Force their
eager
dog
to
to be
have
pet.
their dog have this interaction. And I was not eager for that. My dog actually was not pulling away or anything else. He was actually kind of curious about the boy, which I loved, but I didn't want some wild, like he was really, they were running around screaming, wrestling, and they were over aroused, and I
Mhm.
didn't know if he would be gentle or if he would be one of those pat petters where they reach over and go pat, pat, pat on top of the dog's head or whatever. That's the last thing my dog would want. So regardless of my dog's interest, I didn't know this boy. His parent was working, literally making food in a food truck, wasn't watching the child. And so I had to be the advocate for both of them.
Yeah.
And so I do think that, it's just important to remember the whole consent situation. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap this up. I just want to thank you again for taking the time to talk to us about living on the road with kids and dogs, tight spaces, safety around random people's dogs, because some people come and go. It's not that you always get to develop a huge relationship with these people. So you have to be extra careful about some of that stuff. Where can people find you? Because you have a wealth of experience that help parents in other ways. So where's a good place for people to look you up?
MaryPeterson.com is my website. It's still in process of getting up and running because I just changed domains and everything. But you can also find me, Mary Peterson Cook, pretty much everywhere.
Okay. That's great. I will
or
put
the
links to that.
ADHD Nomads is also one that we're getting up and going as well, which is purely just travel stuff.
Love that. That's great. I will link to those things in the show notes so people can find you. I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you for listening to the Pooch Parenting Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player and leave a review. But even better yet, tell a friend. Are you in some moms groups, perhaps? Or maybe you're friendly with your pediatrician. Please let them know that resources like this exist, because the information that I share with my people goes beyond what most baby books offer, and a lot of parents need support. You'd be doing them a favor. Thanks again. Have a great day.